Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift into the crumbling remains of a kingdom that forgot itself. Imagine this. You're walking through a dry, windswept plain under a heavy lavender sky, and your boots kick up dust that hasn't been stirred in centuries. Beneath your feet, the shattered tiles of a once mighty palace. You hear the wind whisper, words you don't understand, in a language no one speaks anymore. The kingdom was real, vast, glittering, and now it's just a footnote, if that. And here's the kicker. You probably won't survive this kingdom either, not because of swords or plagues, though those do make appearances, but because this place has a way of sliding out of memory, like a dream you try to tell someone, but it vanishes mid-sentence. It forgot itself so thoroughly that even the ghosts have stage fright. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening in bed, let me know where you are and what time it is. I always like to imagine who's out there traveling with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're trudging across cracked stone that once outlined a great courtyard. The air smells like dry grass and scorched metal, an odd coppery note that shouldn't be there, like something burnt a very long time ago. This kingdom, unnamed now but once known across 3 seas, stretched from snow-draped mountains to lush valleys stitched with silver canals. And yet, nothing remains. No epic poems, no famous battles in the school books, just scattered stones in some very confused archaeologists. The first ruins you see are almost playful. A row of statues, each shaped like a person mid-sneeze. That's not a joke. The locals once believed sneezing was a sacred act, a way the soul briefly jumped out of the body to peek at eternity. Historians still argue whether these statues were meant to honor that belief or mock it. Honestly, who commissions a 12-foot man with a runny nose? You reach a tilted archway, carved with characters no one can read. Not forgotten, exactly, more like overwritten. Like someone came later and politely erased the letters, then wrote their own nonsense over the top. You've seen this pattern before. Layers of civilization, sure, but here it's aggressive, purposeful, as though someone or something really wanted the original story to vanish. The city at the heart of this forgotten land wasn't always so anonymous. Once it was a beacon, literally. Its high towers were covered in polished glass that caught the morning sun and sent glittering signals to outposts miles away. Merchants would arrive just to watch the buildings flash at dawn. They said the city could talk to the horizon, not in a metaphorical, poetic sense, in actual blinding Morse code. One mainstream historian, let's call him Professor Barrelcoat, since he insists on wearing one, suggested the city's fall was due to overconfidence in its signal towers. They stopped sending scouts, relying on mirrors instead. One day, an enemy army simply walked in from the north. No one noticed. The cowards flashed their little greetings, and the enemy waved back. By the time anyone sounded the alarm, the invaders were eating figs in the royal pantry. But even that tale doesn't explain the complete erasure. Kingdoms fall all the time. But this one didn't just fall, it unhappened. Like a book that gets pulped before it's published. You wander into what must have been the royal garden. Even now, thorned vines trace curling patterns in the dirt. There's a sweet, almost lemony scent. One bush, tiny and gnarled, carries a single bright orange fruit. You pluck it, curious, and it crumbles like ash in your hand. These were once called memory plums, a delicacy said to sharpen recollection. One bite, and you could remember the names of every person you'd ever loved or hated, supposedly banned later because of emotional overload. Again, scholars debate whether memory plums were real or just a poetic excuse for family drama. You sit on the cracked rim of an empty fountain. The air buzzes just barely. Maybe insects, maybe something else. You press your palm to the stone beside you and feel a warmth that shouldn't be there, like the city remembers. Not in a conscious way, of course, but in that quiet, heavy way a place holds on to echoes. Someone danced here once. Someone declared war. Someone laughed so hard they fell in. And then they all forgot. Not just the names or dates, but the shape of the language itself. A nation without grammar. Even their calendar was deliberately odd. 13 months of 20 days, each named after animals that don't seem to have existed. The month of the velvet lizard, the week of the spitting turtle. You'd think that would be easy to remember. Turns out it wasn't. You make your way to a stone plaque, cracked down the middle. Only 2 letters survive. The. That's it. Could have been the, could have been thanks for nothing. Who knows? Some modern researchers claim the name of this kingdom is hidden in plain sight, encrypted in nursery rhymes or sea shanties sung off-tempo. One theory, don't laugh, is that the kingdom's name is an auditory illusion, only visible when sung backwards in the rain. So far, that test has yielded some very wet, very confused interns. Still, there's a power in absence, in forgetting. Some say the people wanted it this way, a slow, voluntary erasure. Maybe they saw the future coming, plagues, wars, TikTok, and decided to leave the party early. Just fold themselves away. It's a seductive idea, isn't it? To vanish with dignity before you become a punchline. You reach the edge of the city where the stones fade into wild grass. There's a single tree here, growing from the skeleton of a crumbled watchtower. A crow sits on one of the bare branches. It tilts its head at you. It's probably just curious, or maybe it remembers. The wind picks up again, just slightly. It carries no message, no secrets, only dust, and the scent of oranges that aren't really there. You follow a crooked road now. Well, what used to be a road. Stones have sunken like loose teeth into the ground, and grasses have politely taken over. Every few feet, you spot a scrap of something that doesn't belong in the wild. A brass clasp, the handle of a broken jug, a single boot turned green with age. The road leads you into the heart of the city that once named the wind. Yes, named it. That's not poetic nonsense. They literally believed the wind had names, plural, different types depending on mood, time of day, or the direction it slapped you in the face. There was Ulthar, the east morning breeze that brought dew and gossip. Then maroon, a high noon wind that was said to carry secrets from the palace to the outer slums. If you believe the folk tales, and you kind of have to because they're all that's left, this city's engineers built the streets and towers to channel these winds like music through a flute. Every alleyway played a tune. Every gust had purpose. You pass beneath a low arch, etched with swirls that mimic the wind's path. Inside, the remains of a square, once crowded, now silent. The place was called the Whispering Forum. People didn't speak here, they listened. The wind would carry rumors, confessions, declarations. It sounds impossible, but mainstream historians confirm that the architecture here really did manipulate sound in strange, almost intentional ways. One scholar described it as an accidental cathedral of gossip. Still, the whole idea of talking winds, hard to verify. Fringe researchers insist that the wind-speaking practice wasn't metaphorical, it was magical. Supposedly high priests, called aerophants, which sounds like a rejected Marvel villain, could ask the wind to carry commands or even warnings to distant lands. Historians still argue whether these accounts were exaggerated oral histories or if the wind was just a convenient excuse for bad diplomacy. You pause in the middle of the square and feel a breeze stir your sleeve. It isn't cold exactly, but it brings a faint smell. Stone dust and jasmine. You think you hear something too. A word? A whistle? No, just your brain filling in gaps. Right? You duck into a collapsed building where roots crawl down walls like timid spiders. This was once the School of Current Affairs, a pun apparently, since they taught weather prediction and political strategy in the same room. Inside, cracked tiles still hold paint, green, blue, white. A faded mural shows three scholars bent over scrolls while clouds spiral above their heads. Below, the words, "We listen, therefore we lead." It sounds noble and also like a really ineffective government motto. The school wasn't just a weather academy. It also functioned as a social command center. Citywide announcements were whispered from here via networks of hollow tubes and horn-shaped vents scattered through walls and rooftops. You can still spot some, little rusted funnels sticking up like mushrooms. Rumor has it the city's last king, the so-called mute monarch, issued his decrees only through these vents. He never showed his face, just the voice, drifting like wind. One foreign visitor described it as being ruled by a breeze with opinions. And here's where it gets even stranger. According to local lore, the winds started behaving differently toward the end. They wouldn't follow the expected paths. Maroon blew at midnight. Ulthar stopped altogether. Children were born with hearing far sharper than normal. People claimed they could hear voices in their dreams carried by breezes that slipped in through closed windows. The priests blamed unnamed winds, strangers in the sky. The council panicked and tried to close off sections of the city with wind-blocking barriers, which, if you've ever tried stopping wind with stone, you know was about as effective as duct taping a waterfall. Modern meteorologists who study the terrain believe that climate shifts, subtle changes in sea currents and mountain snowpack might have scrambled the once stable weather patterns. There's some truth to that. Still, it's hard to ignore how personal it all seemed to the people living here, as if the winds were punishing them for some betrayal. Or maybe just getting bored. You leave the school and walk into what remains of the Royal Promenade. Columns lean like drunks at closing time, and moss paints elegant shadows across the stone. This was once the setting for grand festivals celebrating each wind anniversary, a rotating calendar of sky events no one else in the world observed. Every 7th year, they held a ritual where citizens would climb the tallest tower and shout their deepest regret into the air. The belief was that the wind would carry it away, light as pollen. Quirky, sure. But effective? A recent dig revealed jars buried at the base of that tower. Inside, each a tiny parchment with a regret written in blood or wine. It's not clear if the people knew they weren't actually giving it to the wind or if they just liked backup copies. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic atonement or some early form of communal therapy. Of course, not all wind-related customs were so poetic. One disturbing story involves the so-called scream fences, barriers laced with copper wire and ceramic flutes that supposedly captured unwanted noises. Criminals were forced to scream into them as punishment. Their cries bottled and released on special days. A few of these flutes have been recovered. They don't make a sound anymore, but they do vibrate slightly in the palm. Not creepy at all. By the time the city began its decline, the wind traditions became more erratic. The Aerophants fell out of favor. The king, still mute, disappeared completely. Festivals stopped. The tower stood silent, and the streets, once full of overlapping whispers, became too quiet. People started leaving, some slowly, others in one enormous migration that left half the city abandoned overnight. You find yourself now at the edge of a small dome, a wind chamber. You step inside and, for a moment, everything goes still, utterly silent. Then a single gust swirls around you in a perfect circle, like a breath being held. Just as quickly, it's gone. They called this place the listening room. It was designed to amplify even the faintest sound. A coin drop, a whispered word. It's where leaders once came to hear the wind's judgment. You sit there for a while, not saying anything. The wind doesn't respond. The sun shifts overhead, and its light creeps like slow water into the abandoned corridors of what was once the Golden Court. You make your way down a broad stoned avenue lined with what appear to be sculptures. Delicate, detailed, and weird. Very weird. One depicts a cat wearing a crown of firecrackers. Another shows a group of robed figures bowing to a loaf of bread. You blink, thinking maybe you're tired. Nope, still there. This was no ordinary kingdom, and this was no ordinary court. You enter what remains of the palace. The air smells faintly of dust and something sweet, like rotting fruit or forgotten perfume. The main hall was once plated with gold leaf and crushed sapphire. Not anymore. Now it's just hints, patches of shimmer on a cracked ceiling, glitter stuck in the grout like the world's saddest craft project. But once, this room saw feasts beyond imagination. This was a kingdom obsessed with stories, not just telling them, believing them, living them. The royal family kept a full-time staff of over 100 narrative advisors whose job was to rewrite daily events into heroic or poetic form. Lose a battle? We performed a strategic retreat into metaphor. Crop failure? The land is resting, composing a song in its roots. You couldn't get in trouble for lying, only for being uninteresting. In fact, the court once banished a treasurer for being factually correct but narratively dry. He was exiled to the north and supposedly built a community of fellow pedants who preferred accurate numbers over enchanted parables. The kingdom referred to them as the dull north, and maps often depicted it with yawns instead of cities. This love of stories spilled over into religion, but not in the usual sense. You expect gods, bearded ones, winged ones, ones who throw thunder. Not here. Instead, the kingdom deified ideas. The cult of the possible worshipped innovation, and its holy symbol was an empty blueprint. The order of the maybe believed in maintaining indecision as a sacred state. Imagine trying to schedule a meeting with them. And then there was the church of the self-fulfilling prophecy. Their sacred texts were blank books. The idea? You write your future, then follow it until it becomes true. Fringe archaeologists argue this was a deeply empowering system. Others claim it's why the kingdom eventually collapsed. It was run by people pretending they'd already succeeded. Historians still argue whether these religious systems were tongue-in-cheek or whether the population truly believed them. Personally, when you're surrounded by statues of golden question marks and altars shaped like hourglasses, it's hard to tell where sincerity ends and performance begins. One mainstream historian, a no-nonsense woman with 7 PhDs and exactly 0 patience for nonsense, argues that the kingdom's fixation on story over strategy is what doomed it. She wrote, "They feasted on myth while starving in reality." And that checks out. During a known drought, the palace hosted a feast of imaginary rain, where guests mined eating soup and were applauded for their creativity. Meanwhile, the peasants were out licking dew off rooftops. And those feasts? Oh, they were legendary. Not always in a good way. The kitchens employed illusionists to make basic food look like exotic delicacies. Porridge became phoenix eggs. Cabbage became gold leaf-wrapped moonfish. There was even a dessert called the memory of a peach, which was literally an empty plate placed in front of you while someone described a peach very sensually into your ear. It sounds silly, but some guests claimed they could taste it. Others just left hungry and confused. You sit in what remains of the banquet hall. The long table is now just a skeleton of wood and moss. A broken goblet rests at your elbow, its rim chipped into the shape of a crescent moon. Above you hangs the shattered frame of the crown of all moments, a chandelier made of timepieces from every known region. It was said to keep the kingdom's sense of time balanced. After it broke, well, the calendars went weird. One year was accidentally recorded twice, another not at all. The palace also contained a secret room, the Hall of Counterfables. Only a few scribes were allowed inside. Its job? To record every version of the truth that didn't make it into the public record. For example, when a foreign dignitary slipped on a banana peel in the royal courtyard, the official story was that he performed a ceremonial dance. But the real event was written down and sealed away. That archive was supposed to be opened only if the kingdom forgot itself. You know, just in case. No one ever opened it. You wander further past portraits of royals in increasingly dramatic outfits. One queen wore a gown made entirely of painted feathers. Another king wore no clothes at all during public appearances, insisting that fabric conceals fate. A brave stylist once called that deeply awkward and was reassigned to the Royal Lint Commission. Despite all this, the kingdom did have its charm. Visitors wrote of a place that felt like living inside a bedtime story, where every person, noble or not, had the right to narrate their own life however they chose. It was freedom of expression taken to its most extreme form. And for a while, it worked. People were happy. Artists were revered. Truth bent like warm wax, and no one seemed to mind. But stories, if untethered, drift. They lose shape. And when disaster finally came, no one knew what was real. Warnings were seen as plot twists. Starvation became a metaphor for spiritual growth. And by the time it mattered, no one could remember what the kingdom was supposed to be anymore. You find a small theater in the rear of the palace. The stage is cracked, the seats overturned, but on the wall is a simple carving that reads, "The end is always Act 1 in disguise." You sit for a moment. Dust dances in the light. Maybe someone will come on stage. Maybe not. Either way, the story, their story, never truly stopped. It just became harder to tell. You leave the fading glamour of the palace behind, stepping out into a sunlit stillness that presses against your skin like old parchment. The air is warmer now, heavier, and a strange dampness clings to the breeze. The cracked stones underfoot give way to softer earth, and in the distance, you spot what was once the kingdom's great lifeline, the river Anher, or what's left of it. Once a shimmering ribbon of silver threading through the landscape, the Anher was the reason this kingdom rose in the first place. It fed crops, powered wheels, carried messages, and mirrored the stars so perfectly that ancient navigators used it like a liquid compass. But now, it's a whisper of itself, a mud-veined trickle winding between fractured banks, too tired to protest. It didn't dry up all at once. That would have been dramatic, poetic even. No, it failed the way most things in this kingdom did. Slowly, awkwardly, with a lot of committee meetings. At some point, the rains shifted. The mountains stopped giving up their meltwater, and instead of adapting, the Royal Council commissioned murals depicting the noble retreat of water. Beautiful stuff, utterly useless. You walk along what used to be the Queen's reflection path, a riverside promenade paved with quartz stones so polished that nobles could check their hair as they strolled. It's patchy now, overgrown with moss and weeds, but in the ripples of remaining puddles, you can still catch glimpses of what was: lanterns shaped like floating lilies, perfumed fountains that misted the air with rose water and citrus. And then, of course, there was the well. You find it near the center of the dry river bed, framed by crumbled columns and wrapped in rusted chains. It's deeper than you expect, a hollow echo when you drop a pebble in. According to legend, this was the well of reversals. People would come here to ask for second chances. Some said the water remembered what had been undone. Others claimed it showed visions of choices never made. The high priest forbade commoners from using it after a series of, let's say, inconvenient changes of heart. One story tells of a baker who fell in love with his best friend's wife, dropped a wish into the well, and emerged an hour later as a beekeeper with no memory of either person. Nobody really knows if it had any real power or if it was simply a cultural placebo, an outlet for people who had no say in their own futures. You sit on its crumbling edge and listen. Just the wind, a bird in the reeds, and something else. Faint, like a sigh. You lean over, half expecting a ghost or a wish to claw its way up. But it's only water, murky, still moving, barely moving. The kingdom, desperate to save itself, did what all declining powers do when faced with natural catastrophe. It over-engineered the problem. A series of artificial dams, aqueducts, and reverse flow turbines were built, designed by a famously reclusive inventor known only as Thol. He believed he could teach rivers to run backward, and for a time, he sort of did. The dams pumped water against gravity, pulling it from lower plains and forcing it back into the drying heart of the kingdom. It worked for about 6 months. Then the turbines clogged with fish. The channels overflowed into noble vineyards. One aqueduct collapsed during a royal wedding, sending several guests, a harpist, and the ceremonial flamingo flotilla downriver at alarming speed. Thol disappeared shortly afterward. His final journal entry read, "Water hates instructions." And maybe it did, because after that, things got stranger. Crops refused to grow along the riverbanks. The fish became deformed, extra fins, glowing eyes, or in one case, an unsettling human smile. Local farmers claimed that the river had turned on them. Some said it whispered at night. Others reported dreams of drowning in rooms with no water. A fringe theory suggests the kingdom accidentally disrupted a natural ley line, that the Anhu was more than just a river, more than just water. You walk further along the river's path toward the remains of a bridge. It once connected the capital to the eastern provinces, now completely swallowed by forest. The bridge collapsed after a caravan of courtiers tried to carry an enormous golden statue of the Wind Queen across it. She was heavy. She did not make it. The whole thing fell into the river and vanished, Locals still claim to see her face in puddles after a storm. Even the rain changed. It began to fall in strange patterns, not in droplets, but in sheets that sliced sideways like thrown cards. And the rain smelled wrong. Ozone and cinnamon. In some places, it wouldn't soak the earth at all. It would beat up and roll off like mercury. The royal astrologers called it sky's withdrawal. Farmers called it bad news. You find one of the old irrigation towers, mostly intact. Inside, spiral stairs rise up toward a domed observatory, once used to chart both the weather and the heavens. The ceiling is still painted, stars, comets, and in the center, a map of the Anhu as it looked in the kingdom's golden age. It flows like a snake made of starlight. There's an inscription beneath it, barely legible. As above, so beside. Not quite the version you know. You climb to the top, and for a moment, the whole river valley unfolds around you, dry, cracked, silent, but beautiful, in a haunting way, like a letter never sent, or a song cut off mid-note. Some believe the kingdom saw all this coming, that it read the sky and the soil and decided to deny it. Others say they tried to fix it and simply failed. And some, especially the romantic fringe, believe the river was part of the kingdom's identity, that when it began to vanish, so did the memory of the place itself, like a story whose ink slowly ran dry. You descend from the tower and continue along the riverbed until the ground begins to rise. You find a single plaque worn down by time. The letters are nearly gone, but you make out one phrase. Here we listened. Here we lost. And the wind picks up again, just slightly. A breeze from nowhere. It dances across the dry stones, as if trying to remember how the river used to sing. The path veers away from the dry river now, winding up through a neighborhood that looks more like a giant child's forgotten toy set than the ruins of a capital city. Half-crumbled homes lean into each other like gossips. Stairs lead to nowhere. Archways frame nothing but weeds. It's strangely peaceful, almost cozy. You're in what was once the Living Scroll District, a neighborhood designed to change. Literally. Each building was equipped with rotating wall panels, interchangeable roofs, and furniture on rails. Why? So the homes could reflect the stories of the people living in them. One day you lived in a tale of triumph, the next a tragedy. It was immersive role-play turned urban planning. Creative, yes. Stable? Not remotely. But the deeper you go, the more you notice something odd. Murals with misaligned faces, plaques that contradict each other, family crests that seem off. It feels like the whole neighborhood is misremembering itself. And then it hits you. This is where the kingdom began to forget. This wasn't sudden amnesia. It was generational confusion, an identity theft committed by time, and, in some cases, by design. After the river changed and the wind went strange, people didn't just lose crops or faith. They lost context. Stories passed down from parents to children began to warp. Details got swapped, rearranged, rewritten. Entire family lineages were corrected by popular vote. You duck into a roofless house. Inside, etched into the floor is a family tree. But half the names are scratched out and rewritten, sometimes more than once. One line even loops back on itself, forming a perfect circle. Either this family married their own great-grandparents, or history had a bit of a meltdown. In a central plaza nearby, there was a statue of a teacher, one of the old lore keepers. She's frozen mid-lecture, her hand pointing to a map etched onto a slate. But the map has been burned, and in its place, a child's scrawl reads, "No one lives where they say." That sounds like a metaphor. It might not be. There was a period known as the Echo generation, kids born during the drought and the decline, raised on dreams of what the kingdom used to be. But they weren't told the truth. They were told comforting fragments, idealized half-memories. One poem written during that time describes the kingdom as a house of mirrors built inside a cloud. The Echo children grew up to be dreamers, artists, but also the worst historians imaginable. One generation swore the old flag was a blue sun. Their children said it was a green raven. Their grandchildren didn't know what flags were. Mainstream scholars believe this breakdown wasn't an accident. After all, the royal court had long favored stories over facts. But some evidence suggests this forgetting was a deliberate act of cultural maintenance. There are scrolls, mostly found in cracked pottery or behind murals, that contain instructions for memory management. One of them reads, "Let only what uplift remain. Burn the rest." Historians still argue whether this was a survival tactic or a slow intellectual suicide. You pause beside a small schoolhouse. Its door hangs askew. Inside, the walls are painted with constellations, but not any you'd recognize. One student scribbled in charcoal, "My mother says stars used to move." Maybe she meant they shimmered, or maybe that was another memory gone sideways. The kingdom eventually attempted to correct course. A program called the Great Remembrance was launched, a coordinated effort to reconstruct national identity. But it backfired spectacularly. Instead of unifying the story, it birthed dozens of competing ones. One province taught their children they were descended from sky serpents who wrote music. Another claimed their ancestors came from beneath the sea and could only eat yellow food. None of it was true, but no one could prove otherwise. The old records were gone, burned, hidden, or rewritten so many times they made less sense than a pigeon's diary. You make your way through a square where people once celebrated the festival of remembered faces. Every year, citizens wore masks shaped like historical figures. But here's the kicker: most of them were invented. The whole point was to imagine heroes that might have existed, then treat them as real for a day. Kids marched as Admiral Feathercloak or Queen Lentina of the Soup Rebellion. It sounds adorable. It also helped permanently blur the line between truth and fantasy. One recovered ledger from the festival committee includes a memo that says, "Memory is more useful when it inspires than when it informs." It's inspirational and deeply unsettling. And the people, They adapted, sort of. Some stopped trying to remember. They embraced the fog, calling themselves the blank. They believed names were burdens, and that true peace could only be found in forgetting everything. They lived in silence, wrote nothing down, and reportedly had the best sleep of anyone in the kingdom. Jealous? Others became obsessive archivists, collecting scraps, whispers, songs, and recipes, anything they thought might be a clue. But without a shared frame of reference, their collections contradicted each other constantly. One claimed the kingdom was founded by talking moths. Another swore it was a lost colony from a larger empire across the sea, except no one remembered what sea. You find one of these private archives behind a vine-draped stone house. Inside, scrolls lie in uneven piles. Some are blank. Some are poems. One is just a list of smells. Another is a recipe for sun-warmed memory cakes. Ingredients: flour, salt, 1 hour of laughter, and a moment you wished had lasted longer. Not helpful in practice, but sweet, in a slightly desperate way. And then you spot a mural, a group of people standing in a circle, holding hands. Above them floats a phrase, "We forgot together." It wasn't an accident, not entirely. It was a decision, or maybe an infection, or both. Because what happens when a whole society stops agreeing on what's true? When memory becomes a matter of style, you get exactly this: a place where even the stones don't know what they used to be. You step out into the street. The wind shifts. It sounds like a child trying to remember a lullaby. And for a moment, you almost recognize the tune. Almost. You follow the broken path eastward, where the homes thin out and the earth hardens beneath your feet. The air changes here. It carries less wind, more weight. Not pressure exactly, but presence. You feel watched, though nothing stirs but the grass. Ahead rises a jagged hill, unnaturally straight at the top, as if the land had been trimmed by a giant hand. This is where the kingdom buried what it couldn't understand. They called it the Archive of Unspoken Things. Not a library in the usual sense. No doors, no shelves, no card catalogs smelling of regret and mildew. This was more like a cemetery for knowledge deemed dangerous, unverifiable, or in some especially pretentious reports, ontologically impolite. You reach its edge, where broken pillars lean together like an exhausted alphabet. You step between them, into a space that hums with half-forgotten rules. The archive wasn't always hidden. Originally, it was part of the Royal Academy, a towering campus where thinkers of every kind gathered to debate, invent, and occasionally duel with very long spoons. But as the kingdom's obsession with storytelling grew and the facts got messier, the academy divided. One half continued publishing noble lies and heroic epics. The other half got exiled, banished here to what became the archive. At first, it was noble work. Preserve the unwanted truths. Catalog the things no one wanted to hear. But as the rest of the kingdom forgot itself, the archive began to rot, not physically, intellectually. Its scribes, cut off from the capital and surrounded by contradictions, started doubting their own memories. Some began writing books that changed their contents from one day to the next. Others wrote in mirrored scripts, insisting it was the only way to record a world flipped upside down. Historians still argue whether this place was an early experiment in epistemology or just a very elaborate nervous breakdown. You step inside a stone chamber half buried in the hill. Shelves made of petrified wood stretch up into shadows. Most scrolls have fallen, their ink long faded, but some remain, wrapped in waxed leather, sealed with bone clasps, tagged with odd titles like Things That Might Still Be True or Accounts Adjusted for Listener Bias. You unroll one. It's a letter, unsigned, describing a meeting between the kingdom's last mapmaker and a traveling cloud. Yes, you read that right. The cloud speaks. It asks the mapmaker to stop drawing borders, says the land is tired of being divided. The mapmaker replies, then who will know where they are? And the cloud says, maybe that's the point. Probably a metaphor. Hopefully. Another scroll details a forgotten ceremony where citizens would gather at dawn and confess what they no longer believed. It was called the ritual of release. Some scholars believe it served as an emotional purge, a psychological reboot to help people keep functioning in a world where the truth changed weekly. Others think it was just really dramatic group therapy.
Either way, you can imagine the scene. Hundreds of people whispering into the dawn light, letting go of things like, I no longer believe my grandfather rode a comet, or I don't think the river actually sang. Not because they were lies, because they weren't useful anymore. And this is where things get really strange. Near the back of the archive is a black stone obelisk. It buzzes faintly when you approach, like it's remembering you. Or maybe you're remembering it. Etched into its sides are hundreds of tiny sentences, fragments really, none complete. Some are in languages no one speaks anymore. Others are in your own, though the meanings twist if you stare too long. A few read, "The crown never sat on anyone's head. We pretended to be lost so we wouldn't be found. Even silence, if told often enough, becomes noise." One of the scrolls describes this obelisk as the kingdom's last memory, not of events, but of forgetting itself. Supposedly, if you whispered your name to it, it would echo back everything you'd forgotten about yourself. But no two people ever heard the same thing. One man claimed it told him he was once a bird. Another said it reminded her of a lullaby sung before she was born. You lean in, say nothing. It says nothing back. A fringe researcher, part philosopher, part self-declared emotional archaeologist, once argued that the kingdom didn't vanish because of drought or politics or even memory loss. She claimed it vanished because it chose to forget, that every culture has a breaking point where remembering becomes too painful, too complicated, and so it rewrites, edits, deletes, one cut at a time, until the past becomes a smooth, empty page. Mainstream scholars find this idea romantic and thoroughly unprovable. Naturally, it's the theory that's most popular with the late-night crowd and amateur history blogs.
You wander deeper into a chamber with stone benches and the domed ceiling painted like a night sky. Here, archivists once gathered to unread forbidden texts. They'd recite them backwards, burn them, or cover the words with clay, anything to undo the remembering. But the ritual had side effects. Some claimed they'd see the erased words in dreams. Others lost chunks of unrelated memory, like how to tie shoes or their spouse's face. There's graffiti here too, some from long-gone archivists. One reads, "What we buried grows roots." Another, "They told us to keep the truth, but never said what to feed it." You sit in the echoing chamber and realize something unsettling. There are no clear villains in this story, no evil sorcerer or conquering empire, just 1,000 tiny decisions that led to silence, a little denial here, a little idealism there, a few pretty lies left uncorrected. Outside, the wind picks up again, but not with anger, more like it's searching, asking. You descend the hill, away from the archive. The stones seem to watch you leave, as if grateful for your silence. And though you carry nothing physical from that place, something clings to you, a feeling like stepping out of a dream mid-sentence. Somewhere, a scroll rolls itself shut. The ground shifts under your feet, less dust, more crunch. You're walking on layers of forgotten paths now, some paved with ceramic tiles, others just etched into dirt by countless feet that aren't here anymore. The kingdom's roads were once famous for their beauty. Each route had its own aesthetic. The jade mile glittered with embedded green stones. The whispering route played soft wind chimes from trees planted evenly along its border. But the road ahead is different. It's the mosaic of paths, the kingdom's attempt at unity. A patchwork of trails pulled from every province, stitched together with intention and hope. Now it's a crumbling quilt of stone, glass, and bone. They built this road when everything was already falling apart, when provinces were pulling away, not just physically, but ideologically. Some wanted to return to tradition, others demanded full immersion in imagination. One group proposed abolishing history altogether in favor of non-linear temporal exploration, which basically meant guessing what would have happened if the past had better taste. You walk past a monument shaped like a tree stump, polished smooth. A plaque beneath reads, "Here the provinces agree to stay." There's another plaque next to it, half buried in dirt, that says, "They left anyway." Well, at least someone had a sense of humor. As the kingdom splintered, cartographers entered their golden age and then immediately drove each other insane. Maps multiplied wildly, each insisting on different borders, capitals, even oceans. Some showed the kingdom as a perfect circle, others as a spiral, a feather, a question mark. One popular version depicted the nation as a sleeping figure whose dreams formed the outlands. Try navigating with that. Mainstream historians agree that this era marked the beginning of total disorientation. People no longer knew where they stood, literally. A traveler might enter one town and be welcomed as a hero, only to be labeled a stranger 2 hills away. A merchant once claimed he crossed 3 borders without leaving his front porch. And you feel it now, that slippage. As you walk, the terrain around you blurs at the edges, not visually, but narratively. You step through a grove of trees that feel like part of one story, only to exit into a landscape that contradicts it. One moment you're in a pastoral painting, the next a crumbling techno-fantasy where vines grow through old data towers. Either the path is confused or the kingdom refused to choose. Some believe that was the real problem. Not that the nation forgot, but that it remembered too many things at once. Layer upon layer of history stacked like an overstuffed sandwich until the bread gave out. One fragment of recovered text even reads, "We all had different dreams. We just slept in the same bed." Eventually, the kingdom did what any exhausted bureaucracy would do. It formed a new department, the Ministry of Shared Reality. Its job? Decide which stories were canon and which weren't. You think that sounds practical until you learn how they did it. They held public hearings where citizens could nominate memories for national inclusion. Stories were debated like laws. Votes were cast. Arguments erupted over whether dragons had existed. Verdict? Maybe. Whether the river ever froze over. Verdict? Sometimes. And whether the sky had once been green for a week. Verdict? Artist interpretation. Historians still argue whether this ministry was a bold democratic experiment or the last gasp of a dying identity. Probably both.
You pass a collapsed structure once known as the Synchronicity Pavilion. It was built by the ministry to serve as a kind of cultural fusion point, a space where competing versions of events could be harmonized through interpretive dance, puppetry, or the use of very persuasive snacks. One of the few surviving event flyers reads, "Today's schedule: The Siege of Truth, puppet opera, followed by Enlightenment nachos." Not everything was farce, though. You reach a grove of polished stones, each engraved with a phrase. Together they form a poem. We gathered what we knew as one, then held it up against the sun. But shadows stretched and bent the light until we said, perhaps not right. There's beauty in that, sadness too. You rest beneath a broken monument shaped like a compass. Its needle spins even without wind. A fringe researcher once claimed this was because the land no longer obeyed the laws of direction. Others say the compass is just broken. Still, it fits the theme, a place lost not in space, but in idea. You walk on. The path narrows as it climbs. The stones beneath your feet now include names, personal ones. Every person who once walked this road was invited to leave their mark, but not their own name. Instead, they had to write who they wished to be remembered as. It was called the Trail of Elsewoos. You read, Larka, tamer of rains. Tovin, who heard the wind apologize. No one, but glad I tried. There's something tender about it, a collective yearning for meaning,
or maybe just for better branding. You keep going, and the road becomes rougher. The mosaic ends. Just dirt now. But on a distant ridge, you see something rise, tall, elegant, and still intact. A spire made of pale stone that glows faintly in the fading light. That's where you're headed next. The last piece of the kingdom still standing. The place where they made their final attempt to remember, or to forget, everything for good. The spire waits like a lighthouse for minds instead of ships, its pale stone gleaming despite the deepening dusk. It's the only structure in the entire valley that still seems to know what it is. Everything else you've passed, ruins, roads, rivers, felt like memories questioning themselves. But the spire stands tall, unbothered, the last whisper of a nation that forgot its name, but not its height. Your feet crunch over gravel as you approach. The surrounding landscape is bare. No gardens, no courtyards, just open earth worn flat by time. That's the first clue this wasn't built for the living. It was built for remembering, or maybe for forgetting in one very specific, very organized way. They called it the Tower of Final Versions. It was constructed in the twilight years of the kingdom, after the river dried, after the provinces splintered, and long after anyone could agree on what had actually happened. Its purpose? To hold the last, official story, one version, a definitive account of everything. No edits, no addendums, no footnotes. A monument to closure. And yet, you get closer and see that the doors are still open. Inside, the air is still and perfectly cool, unnaturally so, as if temperature itself had agreed not to interfere. The chamber you enter is circular and vast, its walls lined with tall, flat stones, each etched from top to bottom with small, tight script. No titles, no illustrations, just page after page carved into stone. This was the final chronicle. According to what fringe scholars pieced together from fragmentary notes, the chronicle was compiled over a decade by a team of historians, poets, scientists, priests, and one retired magician with a fear of stairs. They debated every entry. Every detail had to be agreed upon unanimously. If even one member dissented, the event was struck. As a result, some years are blank, entire decades reduced to a line, details pending eternal consensus. You walk along the wall, letting your fingers trail over the engravings. The language is clear, calm, almost too polished. It reads like history that knows it's being watched. You pause at a section near the center. It recounts the founding of the kingdom, how a group of wanderers settled where a comet had struck the earth, believing its crater still held the heat of fate. They built upward from the crater's rim, creating a city shaped like a spiral. That might explain some of the design choices you've seen, or might be entirely invented. There's no comet crater here now, just a perfectly round plaza out front. Mainstream scholars believe this version of the origin story was a compromise, poetic enough to inspire, vague enough to prevent arguments. Historians still argue whether the chronicle was ever finished. Some say the spire's top floor holds the final chapter, sealed and unreadable until the nation remembers itself again. Others claim it was never completed at all, that the writers fought to the very end and left it deliberately open, hoping someone else would finish it. You find a spiral staircase, worn but stable, and climb. The air changes subtly with each step. It smells faintly of parchment, salt, and something floral that doesn't exist anymore. Each landing has another circular room, each filled with records, murals, and curated artifacts from different eras of the kingdom. But these displays feel curated in a nervous way. Each object is carefully labeled, sometimes twice. A child's wooden toy reads, "From the playful years," or possibly the sad ones, depending on interpretation. A broken sundial is labeled, "Used to tell time," or perhaps discourage it. You reach a level marked simply with a carved phrase. Here, we almost agreed. The room is empty. Not empty of objects, empty of narrative. Dozens of scrolls, tapestries, carvings, all crossed out. Red paint slashed through each one, some so vigorously that the stone cracked. This was where the final debate occurred. The story went something like this. The Chronicle team reached the end. They had the entire history of the kingdom laid out. But someone, a poet allegedly, objected to the tone, said it was too clean, too resolved. They wanted ambiguity, because truth rarely ties its shoes. The others resisted, and so the great compromise collapsed. The tower was never closed, because no one agreed on what to write at the end. You ascend one more flight of stairs, the top. The chamber here is open to the sky. No roof, just stars above, new ones now, not the constellations carved on ceilings down in the city. The wind moves through quietly, like someone trying not to wake a sleeping guest. In the center of the floor is a shallow pool. Water still ripples in it, impossibly clear. You lean over and see not your reflection, but a collection of moments, not grand battles or famous rulers, just glimpses. A child touching snow for the first time. A woman whispering to a statue. A man setting fire to his own diary with shaking hands. A stranger laughing during a funeral. Someone standing where you are now, long ago, unsure if they belong. The pool doesn't show you the story, just a story. Maybe yours, maybe the kingdom's. It doesn't matter anymore. Because the people who built this tower finally realized something most nations never admit. That no single version of history can hold everything. That trying to capture it in stone only invites erosion. You sit at the edge of the pool and let your thoughts drift. Some say the kingdom didn't fade because it was weak or foolish. It faded because it was honest. Brave enough to admit that memory is a moving target, that stories change, that people do too. And in doing so, it didn't die. It simply stepped off the page. Maybe it's still here, humming beneath your feet. Maybe every forgotten thing leaves a little warmth behind. You rise, one last glance at the pool. Then you descend, not toward answers, but toward understanding. The descent from the spire feels longer than the climb. Maybe it's the weight of all those almost truths pressing down, or the quiet, too complete to be comfortable. Maybe it's the feeling that you've reached the core of something vast and there's nowhere deeper to go. You step back onto the plain and look behind you. The spire still stands, tall and dignified, but you swear it looks older now, smaller, as if it's beginning to forget itself, too. Your path winds west, toward the outermost edge of the former kingdom, where memory grows so thin the land doesn't even try to hold its shape anymore. The sky here takes on a washed-out, watercolor hue. You can't tell if it's dawn or dusk. There's no sun, just a suggestion of light. The breeze no longer carries scents or songs, just the sensation of things you meant to do. You find a stone archway, half buried in grass, no building attached, just the doorway. Above it, a single word chiseled into the lintel, if. Not welcome or home, just if, like a shrug in stone. This was the border of the kingdom, not the one they defended with armies or debated in parliament. No, this was the conceptual edge, the place where the maps ended, not because the land ran out, but because the meaning did. It was called the verge. Here, people once came to let go of stories, of selves, of everything. Some thought this was a sacred act. Others thought it was cowardice. Historians still argue whether the verge was a philosophical statement or a crisis response measure that got out of hand. It probably started as a retreat for burnt-out scholars. Over time, it became a quiet exodus. You find a low stone wall near the archway. Symbols cover it. Not words, not pictures, just marks, tally-like scratches, swirls, geometric doodles. Some historians believe these are the names of those who chose to leave memory behind. Others think they're just bored people waiting for inspiration. You add your own mark, a simple one, something you'll remember, or won't. You follow what used to be a road. There are no signs, just stones sunken into the earth like teeth. Some are carved with fragments of thought. We were here once. Don't try to fix it. This isn't where it ends, just where it gets quiet. You reach a hill. It's gentle and grassy, nothing special. But at the top, the world below flattens out like a map unrolling. You see the entire kingdom, the dried river, the mosaic roads, the towers, pale tip piercing the distance. You see where memory used to live, and it's peaceful. You sit on the hilltop and think about what kind of place forgets itself. A foolish one, a tired one, or maybe a brave one. Brave enough to admit that no story ever gets told exactly right. Brave enough to say, maybe that didn't happen, but we felt like it did. It's easy to mock them now. The absurd festivals, the puppet-based education system, the Ministry of Shared Realities attempt to merge fact and fiction into a smoothie of national identity. It's easy to laugh, but you can't deny this. They tried. They really tried. They tried to hold themselves together when the world shifted. They tried to preserve meaning without becoming rigid. They tried to leave a legacy that wouldn't rot on the vine of time. And maybe, just maybe, they succeeded in a way no empire ever has. Because you're here, sitting where they once sat, walking roads they built out of confused intentions and beautifully flawed dreams, listening to a story you were never supposed to know. You followed their footprints through memory, myth, and mud. And even if it all slipped away, they made you feel it. Which is kind of the point, isn't it? A crow lands nearby, tilts its head, flies off, like it knows something and isn't telling. You rise. The air smells faintly of rain that doesn't fall. The grass whispers when you step through it. Ahead, the land fades into haze. You cross the invisible line. The kingdom is behind you now, but a piece of it isn't. And now, here we are. The kingdom fades behind your closed eyes like a dream that clung just a little longer than it should have. Your body softens, sinking into the bed beneath you. The journey is over, not with a bang, but a gentle unthreading. No trumpets, no collapsing towers, just the slow hush of silence wrapping around a land that once told stories, then forgot them, and maybe, just maybe, told one more through you. The wind still hums somewhere in that place. The stones still hold warmth. The riverbed still remembers the shape of water. And even if no one alive recalls the kingdom's name, the memory of its forgetting has become something oddly tender, kind even. Like a lullaby you don't quite remember the words to, but still hum when you need comfort. Let yourself drift now, deeper into that space between memory and dream. No need to hold on to details. Let them slip like dry leaves through your fingers. The chronicle is sealed. The spire stands tall. The streets of Elsewheres are quiet tonight. And you're safe. You made it through a nation that never meant to be found. Through echoing halls and whispering fields. You held a story in your hands and let it go, without trying to fix it. That's more than most. So breathe in, let the stars above the spire twinkle a little fainter. Let the breeze fade to hush. You're not in the kingdom anymore. But the kingdom, somehow, is still in you. Sweet dreams. If you can't sleep tonight, it's okay. Some nights are just like that. Your mind drifts. Thoughts spiral quietly like wind through empty streets. Don't force yourself to fall asleep. Just lie still. Breathe slowly and let your heart take its time settling down. Maybe the day was too heavy. Maybe your thoughts are louder than usual. Maybe you just need a moment to feel without needing to explain. These sleepless hours can be a strange kind of comfort. The world is quiet. No one expects anything from you, and you get to just be for a little while. It's not wasted time. You're not behind. You're just here. And I'm here too if you need someone to talk to. Want to share what's on your mind?